Metaphors are valuable didactic tools which are used to teach. Similes are the same. Both similes and metaphors are analogical because they become part of analogies. An example of a metaphor would be if I was to say that Ryan, gentleman here with the hat on, if I said Ryan is a beast. Now that could just be literally true. You know, if you're a human and you take it that human beings are animals, then an animal is a beast, and then, you know, maybe a beast is a mammal. I think usually beasts refer to mammals. And so it could be that that's a literal statement, but in general it would be understood to be metaphorical. Ryan is a beast. It's a direct connection. I just say something is something else. That's a metaphor. A simile would be if I was to say that Ryan is like a beast. If you use the word like or as, it's no longer a metaphor. It's a simile, which technically is a subcategory of a metaphor. But that's not important for today's discussion. If I was to say that Ryan is a beast, or he's like a beast, because he's particularly ferocious on the jiu-jitsu mats, in sparring, Ryan, despite his small stature, fights with a lot of tenacity and ferocity, and therefore he is a beast, or he is like a beast. I've just taken a simile or a metaphor and turned it into an analogy by explaining in detail how the one thing is analogous to the other, how the two things are comparable, and you've understood what I'm trying to teach. When you give enough detail with your simile and your metaphor so that the people you're talking to can understand the exact points of comparison you're attempting to make, then that simile and that metaphor is no longer merely analogical. It's become a full-blown analogy. Do you guys follow that? There's value in analogies. That's why people use them. In Sanskrit, the analogy is called, all types of analogies and analogical things are called Shaka Chandra Nyaya. Shaka means branch. Chandra means moon. Shaka Chandra Nyaya. The logic of the branch and the moon. That's the specific term used for analogies in Sanskrit literature. And Bengali literature also. We find the term in Bengali literature too. Probably there in Hindi literature as well. I don't know. If you were to say to somebody, here's what that means, itself is metaphorical. The statement itself is metaphorical. But anyway, if you were to say to somebody, look at the beautiful moon up in the sky, and they were to say to you, I don't see the moon. Can't see it. Where is it? And they're looking around, and they can't see the moon because they don't know how to scan the sky and quadrants and, figure it out. They can't, they haven't mastered the art of a kind of sector by sector mapping of the skyline. Shh. And so they say, where's the moon? And you say, oh, you see that tree over there? And they go, you mean that one? You go, yeah, that one. Go look between the branches. And you go, oh, there's the moon. So the moon is not literally between the tree branches. The moon is far away. But because you're on Earth, by comparing something unknown to something known, there are all sorts of reasons why people use metaphors and similes. Many of them are for alliteration and for poetic purposes. But the way that the terms are used in Sanskrit, they also get used as part of alliteration. But in this sense, as a logic, as a didactic tool, as a teaching device, the benefit of them is they take something unknown and they compare it to something known. And even though the unknown thing isn't exactly what you're comparing it to, it helps you to get your bearings around the unknown thing by comparing it to the known thing, and then you can sort of springboard off of that and learn something new. If you can just put it right there. Very good. One of our dear devotee families, they lost their son at the 21, right? And so they've come here as part of a memorial service. That's what his picture is. Take a look at this picture. What was your son's name again? Yavin. Devin. Devin. Okay. You threw me for a loop there. Devin. I remember Devin. I just forgot his name momentarily. I know you. I know Devin. I just forgot momentarily his name. You're the Goyal family, right? You're a fan of the Goyal family, right? What's your surname? Daba. Daba. That's right. That's right. Yeah, he passed away recently. So we'll say some prayers for him in a bit. Let me just start again. Not completely start over, but just the last couple sentences. The teaching benefit of metaphors and similes and analogies is you take the moon, which is far away, and you may have a hard time getting your bearings on finding it in the sky because the sky is vast. But the tree, you know, it's in your backyard. You know exactly where it is. You know it like the back of your hand. And so when somebody says the moon is between the tree branches, even though it's not actually fully correct, even though there's something lacking in that statement, it does help you start to wrap your head around something which otherwise would be very difficult to fathom. That's the teaching purpose, the didactic purpose of analogies, similes, and metaphors. They take something unknown, they compare it to something known, and that helps you to create a bridge between those two things, and your knowledge increases. If something has every single point in common with the thing that you're analogically comparing it to, then the value is lost because it's the same thing. If I say Ryan is like Ryan, and that he does things like Ryan does, there's no value. Because either you know Ryan or you don't, and there's no value. So perfect analogies are useless because they have no teaching purpose, because they don't help you to compare something far away to something closer. Do you guys follow this? I'm just going to start again because I feel like you guys aren't paying attention. It's just the way my brain works. If you're not paying attention enough, I just start over again because I already know all this stuff, so I didn't say it for my own benefit. It's for you guys. Let's try to pay attention. Similes and metaphors they have poetic purposes. They're used for alliteration to beautify English or other languages. But they also have a didactic teaching purpose. The teaching purpose is that similes and metaphors compare something unknown to something known, and by doing that, they help you get a little closer to it. How does Ryan spar? He spars like a beast. And everybody's like, ooh, you mean like ferocious? Like it's like a rabid animal? Yeah. And I'm like, okay, I get a sense of it now. I didn't know how Ryan sparred, now you've explained it. Sometimes just saying it's ferocious and tenacious is not as good as comparing it to something specific, that there's a visceral feel to that specific thing you're comparing it to. This in Sanskrit is called Shaka Chandra Nyaya, or the logic of the moon and the branch. If you compare one thing to another and they have every point in common, somebody says to you, oh, your analogy doesn't have every point in common, you can then respond back and go, of course it doesn't, you fool. Otherwise, it would have no value. The very purpose of an analogy is to find something that you know so I can teach you about something you don't know about. The critique is when an analogy doesn't have enough points in common, critical points in common. As long as it has the points you want to make in common, it's a good analogy. Sometimes when describing God, it's difficult to use analogies. Why? Because God's a singularity. If you say God loves you like a mother loves her child, he said, my mother used to beat me. My mother walked out on me. My mother neglected me. My mother died on me when I was young. My mother had to work all day to support the family. My mother let something bad happen to me, and she was a negligent parent. She let some bad things happen to me. That last one, if you think that's not true about your mother, you're lying to yourself. You're in denial. You should probably go get some therapy. Every parent, simply by dint of being a parent, manages to neglect their kid on some level or another. And the kid winds up with some scrapes and bruises, both internally and externally as a result. If you think it didn't happen to you, you're in serious illusion, and you probably need to talk to somebody about it. If you try to compare God's love for you to a mother's love for the child, ultimately it fails because God's a singularity. We're trying to talk about something that there is no comparison to. Do you guys follow this? That said, there's some value in analogy even when talking about stuff that's a singularity. It gives you something, so you're not just floating in space. And you can at least start to build some footholds as you climb that, mountain of truth, as you try to launch yourself into something transcendent. Today I wanted to discuss a rather elaborate metaphor which is used in our scriptures to describe the soul's relationship with God, the reawakening of the soul's relationship with God, the rejuvenation of the soul's relationship with God, the growth of the soul towards God, the soul seeing God, relating to God, leaving this world, going to that world, the whole thing. Our whole spiritual sojourn, our whole hero's journey gets described just over 4 centuries ago in a medieval Bengali text that utilizes an elaborate metaphor which is turned into an analogy and has been explored and extrapolated on for the last 4 centuries. It was an instant classic in our tradition, and it's just been growing in popularity as time goes on. You guys follow this? Now, the nature of the soul's relationship with God is it is a bit of a je ne sais quoi thing. It's something which is difficult to fully fathom or compare to anything in this world because it's unique. It's a singularity. You are yourself, so at least as far as the soul goes, that's not enigmatic. You might need to think about it for a minute, but if you fathom your own existence enough, you can understand at least your own nature. God is a true singularity, where any comparison ultimately falls short. Your relationship with God, therefore, becomes equally a singularity, because it's a relationship with a singularity, and therefore the nature of that relationship is itself singular. You guys following this? All right, the train's leaving the station now. I blew the horn, the whistle enough times. We're now leaving the station. Here we go. The relationship between the soul, well, we'll start off with this. Here's how it actually starts off. Most forms of life are plants. To even be able to move and have full locomotion, which is generally speaking, it's within the animal kingdom, although there are some exceptions like coral and other things like that. But anyway, for the most part, plants are stationary and animals move. Most forms of life are plants. Animals are special. Most forms of animal life are not humans. Human beings are incredibly rare. For every one human being of the 7 billion human beings, there are, I don't know how many other, like, depends how small you want to go. You start getting down to microbes and stuff like that. There's millions and billions of living entities for every one human being. So you won the lottery. You're a human being, you won the lottery. I mean, shoot, you're on planet Earth, you won the lottery in terms of sustaining life. Then if you're a life form on planet Earth, because there's all sorts of inert matter on planet Earth, now you're doubly blessed. Like you won the ultimate lottery, the one that doesn't exist. Even the term lottery fails to really compare the numbers we're talking about. Then if you're an animal and not a plant, that's, you won another lottery. And if you're a human being amongst the animals, it's another one. We have the power to think about the nature of ultimate reality. We have recursive language. We have the ability to philosophize. I mean, there's so many things about being a human being that it's just astoundingly special. And, it's just like you shouldn't ignore your white privilege if you're white. You shouldn't ignore your human privilege if you're a human. Because it's special. We do egregiously bad things with it. Like animals would never ruin the world. We ruin the world. We're like some kind of, what do you call that? We're parasitic, sure, that would work. I was going for something a little more sensational. I was going to say what's that from Austin Powers, the bad guy? Dr. Evil. We're like a Dr. Evil in the amount of terrible stuff we can do to the planet while we occupy it. Most human beings aren't truly spiritual. Most human beings are religious. Most human beings aren't truly spiritual. They're dharmadvajis, to use the term. They're dharma and dvaj. They're waving the flag of dharma, meaning that they're, like we say, you wrap yourself in a flag. It's a common trope in literature, meaning that you pretend that you're more pious than you are by wrapping yourself in the flag of nationalism or whatever it might be. So most people just wave the flag of religion. They don't actually embrace it. Shh. Some few people really embrace Dharma. Most of those people end up becoming impersonalists. And then amongst those few people who embrace Dharma, just very few of them become devotees of Krishna. So that's how our authors set up the metaphor they're going to give. They really want you to appreciate how special it is to be here now as a human being talking about deep spirituality and having a conversation with our tradition. And then they say that the type of spirituality that we are after, the type of relationship with divinity that we're after, is given to you in the form of a seed. And now we're starting with our metaphor. The metaphor is of the plant of bhakti, and plants begin with seeds. And so we're told that you get the seed of bhakti. Brahmanda Brahmite Kom Bhagyavanji Guru Krishna Prashade Poi Bhakti Lata Beach. That everyone is wandering around this universe. They're just wandering around the universe with, no purpose. And it's the most fortunate soul who, by the grace of Guru and Krishna, get the seed of bhakti. It's interesting, but a lot of times people like to think that they've made their own spirituality. And certainly that's a popular idea nowadays. But that's just, it's delusional. It's like delusions of grandeur. It's like some extreme form of narcissism and entitlement. You didn't even learn how to use a toilet by yourself. You didn't learn how to speak by yourself. And you learn how to think along with your ability to speak because you think in language. Therefore, you didn't learn how to think by yourself. We've been borrowing from other people our whole lives. And when you think you figured something out, you're ignoring the fact that you're standing on the shoulders of giants, your predecessors, and that's the only reason you can see what you can see. If you believe in Jesus, you don't really believe in Jesus. You believe in the 12 apostles who wrote down their ideas about Jesus that you then found compelling enough where you called them truth, and now it's your idea about Jesus, but it was their idea before it became your idea. And so if you're honest, you got to acknowledge the apostolic succession. If you're reading the Gita, you're not directly interfacing with Krishna. This is Sanjaya who's telling you what Krishna and Arjuna said. There's a scribe. He saw it. He wrote it down. You have faith in Krishna and Arjuna in the Gita. You have faith in Sanjaya who wrote down the text. Sanjaya himself says he wrote down the text, Vyasa Prasadat, by the mercy of his guru, Vyas. So we have like an opposite of entitlement culture. We have a gratitude culture where we acknowledge that we're all standing on the shoulders of giants. If you are a devotee, somebody made you a devotee. Somebody stopped you and kind of like bamboozled you and dramatically changed the course of your life by implanting in you a ridiculous notion, namely that you can dance with God and embrace God and kiss God and walk through life hand in hand with your best friend in a more real way than you have friends in this world. If you heard that and you're like, okay, or even just maybe, and you stuck around and then it became okay, that person is the person who made you a devotee. They gave you the seed of bhakti. You're responsible for growing it, but you didn't make the seed. Somebody gave you the seed, and then you're responsible for growing it. But they want to be thorough in their metaphor. And so this is how they started. This is the beginning of the metaphor. The first thing was the intro. This is the beginning of the actual metaphor. So you get a seed. And you could have gotten a seed of the material enjoyment. Like people tell you got to get rich and make a bunch of money, you'll be happy. Or you got to become real popular and you'll become happy. There's all sorts of seeds that people give you that you then plant, and that becomes your raison d'etre, your reason for being, your philosophy of life. But sometimes you get a seed of bhakti. And you should just consider that you're fortunate. Because there's nothing you could have done to warrant that gift. Therefore, it's considered to be merciful. Now there's an interesting debate, why doesn't God give that to everybody, and does it actually belong to God, does devotion to God belong to the devotees? There's like a discussion we could have about that. We're going to skip that one, because you guys didn't pay attention enough with the metaphor, simile part, and now I'm behind schedule. Once you get a seed, and it gets planted in your heart, what's the next thing that has to happen in order for the seed to sprout? You got to water it. So you get a seed, not a karma beach, not a jnana beach, but you get a bhakti, lata beach. Lata is a creeping vine. So it's not just a plant, it's a creeping vine, which is that's not accidental. It's not accidental they chose to use the term vine. A vine is a plant which is always dependent on another plant for its growth. And so it's a particular type of plant that fundamentally is made not to stand on its own like a tree, but it's fundamentally made to attach itself to something else. Like, have any of you ever been to the southern portion of the United States? Something really special in the kind of certain places in the southern United States is they have moss on the trees, right? And it kind of creates a little bit of a musty smell, a little bit of a dank, wet smell, which is also somehow pleasant. Generally when I think of musty, I don't think of pleasant. So somehow it becomes a pleasant, musty smell of this moss that grows in the trees. The moss is different than the tree. And somehow the moss ends up growing in these trees and proliferating. You get these forests of trees with this moss. It's just kind of, there's a humidity which I think facilitates that. And it's quite pleasant, right? That's a little something like a vine. I mean, we all know about vines. Passion fruit vines, tomato vines, grapevines. There's all sorts of vines that people are aware of. And when you grow a vine, you get trellis. You put the vines on trellis, like you grow tomatoes. You just have tomato plants. You have to eventually put them on some scaffolding and grapes and so on and so forth. So you have to water the plant, the seed, for it to sprout. And the watering is chanting. It's our primary spiritual practice. And chanting essentially is crying out to God with abandon in an unreserved and full-throated fashion. And so we cry out to Krishna, and that's our chanting. It's really, it's prayer without asking for anything, just crying out. So that's the water. And then if you water a seed, it sprouts. It begins to grow out of the ground. So the bhakti lata, the vine of bhakti, starts to grow out of the ground. But then other things start to grow out of the ground as well. Other things start to grow. Shaka Chandranaya means the logic of the branch and the moon. Upashaka means weed. It's upa, it's a little branch. That's the name for a weed. And so weeds grow out of the ground because if you water the ground, your vine grows out of the ground, but then weeds also grow alongside it. Anybody's been a gardener has seen this happen. You plant a seed, you water the seed, and a bunch of stuff comes up, your plant and a bunch of other stuff. Sometimes you can't even recognize which one's your plant and which ones are the weeds. It takes some time. And so you thought you planted a tomato, but really some gopher came and ate your tomato plant as a new sprout, and then some other stuff's growing, and you keep growing it, and it keeps coming up, and all of a sudden, turns out you just grew a bunch of weeds. And you spent months of your life growing weeds. Anybody who's ever gardened has this experience. It's totally depressing, and it makes you hate gophers and rabbits and whatever other varmints you're dealing with. So, You got the seed. Seed didn't belong to you. Once it gets sowed in your heart, it does, however, belong to you. We should recognize that we're all standing on the shoulders of giants. Somebody came along and interrupted your life and gave you an idea of something higher. And then you pour water, that's chanting, that's our spiritual practice. And then the plant starts to grow, but it could just as easily be a weed. So you have to learn to know the difference between the weed and the real plant. And the way you do that is you talk to other gardeners who are more expert than yourself, and they tell you that's a weed, that's your plant. And then you have to pull up the weeds so they don't take the water that's meant for your plant and steal it, so your plant becomes crippled and the weeds become strong. Now, what are the weeds? The desire for profit, adoration, distinction, fame, respect, money, etc., etc. Cruelty to other living beings. There's so many weeds that grow in the heart. Lust, anger, and greed, maybe at the top of the list. You could also throw out the 7 deadly sins. We have a bunch. We have like lists of different types of weeds that you have to contend with. And so you have to hang out with gardeners, and then they teach you what's the plant and what's the weeds. And then you can de-weed your garden. Then you got to protect your garden. How do you protect your garden? What do you do when you want to protect your garden from rodents and such? You fence it in. So you got to build a fence. The fence is, and this is why it's not just a metaphor, it becomes an analogy. The fence is the association of devotees. You show up at the temple once a week. You have some friends who are devotees. And then when you tell them the stupid things you're doing, and they tell you, that's terrible, why are you doing that? You shouldn't be doing that. And you argue with them, and they win. And then you're like, all right. And then you, pretty soon, water's wearing away the stone, and you're starting to change your life in pretty profound ways. And you become upwardly mobile because you surround yourself with good people, and those good people challenge you, and they bring out the best in you, and they refuse to let you sink. Sometimes devotees are considered to be like when you know, a crutch. They don't say crutch, they say stick, because they didn't have crutches back then. They just held sticks. It was a little more primitive. But sometimes devotees are thought of as being your stick of support that help you to walk when you can't walk on your own. And they're also a fence because you've got this tender vine that could very easily wither and die. But if you fence it in properly or get eaten, if you fence it in properly, you're safe. And so if you keep good company with good people, then you're protected and you can grow. So now you won the lottery 6 times over. You're on the earth. You're not a rock. You're not a plant. You're not an animal. You're not religious but not spiritual. You follow? And you've even gotten interested in Krishna. 6 times. Like a lottery, you can't even come up with a number. It's so rare. Lottery kind of fails because the numbers are so, it's so special. And then you win again. Somebody gives you the seed of bhakti. And maybe just because they're really good at it, you agree. Maybe it wasn't even that you were so special. Maybe it was more that they were so sincere that moved you. That's generally the experience of devotees. I wasn't even that sincere, but somebody was more sincere and more loving and more compassionate than I was insincere, and somehow their compassion overwhelmed me and changed my life. Now you got the seed. Now it's yours because they gave it to you. It's yours. And you water it, You chant with us what we're going to do. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. And then weeds start growing up. And you start getting lustier and angrier and greedier. I remember the first time I chanted 16 rounds, which is what we chant every day. It took me 4.5 hours. I went to the temple afterwards and tried to give him back my beads. I drove over to the temple and I said, this isn't for me. He said, what are you talking about? I said, I thought I was going crazy. Desires I didn't think I had anymore came cropping up. I thought I was going crazy. They said, yeah, you have an uncontrolled mind. You've never tried to control it. You're finally trying to control it for the first time, and so it's rearing its ugly head. But your mind has always been this uncontrolled. You've just been following it around like a lapdog. And now you're finally trying to control it, and so it's becoming a bit of a battle. What great advice, right? I was 16. I was like, okay. So I went back and kept chanting. So you chant and all sorts of crazy stuff comes up. And then you have to associate with good people so they teach you how to pull the right weeds to make sure your plant grows. And they also provide you with a fence so that vermin and rodents and such can't get in. And now you're off to the races. That vine is growing. But then there's one thing you got to really always be careful for. An elephant, a crazed elephant, could run in, break down your fence, stomp all over your plant, and you're dead in the water. It's the Hati Mata. It's the Hati is in all the Indic languages, Hindi, Bengali, it's for elephant. It comes from Hasti. Hasti is the Sanskrit. Hasta in Sanskrit means hand. And Hasti is that which possesses a hand, because the elephant has the extra trunk, which is like a hand. That's where you get the word Hastinapur. Hastinapur. It's a city with many elephants, which is the name for Old Delhi. And so, Hati Mata, it's the mad elephant, crazed elephant. A crazed elephant is, they say the king of the jungle is a lion. That's straight up 100% a lie. Lions never mess with elephants. If you ever see a lion messing with an elephant, it's a baby elephant that's been separated from its mother and father. Because if there's an adult, if there's not an entire pride of lions or jackals, elephants in one-on-one combat win against any other animal on the planet, including hippos. Hippos also beat lions, by the way. They have monstrous teeth, and they're huge, way bigger than lions. Hippos beat lions, they're not the king of the jungle, and elephants beat hippos. Google it and know what I'm talking about. So the worst thing that can happen to your garden is a mad elephant, because it's literally nothing you can do. If an elephant goes crazy, there's nothing you can do. When you see those elephants in circuses and such, they've been abused and tortured from birth. So they don't realize how powerful they are and what they could do if they wanted to. So a mad elephant comes in, and it's game over. Your whole project, your whole little Minecraft game is just destroyed. It's over. It's like your Minecraft game, somebody just took your phone and just broke it in half. It's like, here you go, play your game. Now what are you going to do? So the mad elephant is to offend a devotee. Devotees are the kind of people who impossibly overcame your own lack of sincerity with their otherworldly compassion. To become ungrateful to them after they've done you that favor is the worst, most dangerous thing you can do to your spiritual life. Because in a very practical sense, it begins to grow your sense of entitlement. which is the birthplace of all bad things. Cicero said that gratitude is not just the greatest of all virtues, it's the parent of all virtues. All good things stem from this feeling of voluntary appreciation and indebtedness to people who helped you, more than what you deserved. The opposite of gratitude is entitlement, and all bad things come from entitlement. And when people become super entitled, we have fancy words like sociopath and narcissist to describe them. It's a malignant form of ingratitude is entitlement. So when you offend and you bite the hand that feeds you, you begin to grow that, and that ultimately can ruin everything. And that's metaphorically likened to a mad elephant who could just utterly destroy your garden. Then, if you do all this right, that vine starts growing. And vines are pernicious. They're particularly dangerous and invasive species because they can grow through almost anything. They just get through stuff. And we have, ivy on this side of your wall, and all of a sudden ivy's on that side of your wall. Like, how did that happen? It's managed to work its way through the pieces of wood and whatever you give it. Even a little tiny piece of wood, a little tiny hole in the wood, it'll work through it. All of a sudden, a huge thing of ivy on the other side. So that works to our benefit because that vine of devotion grows through the material world and pierces through the covering of the universe and makes it all the way to heaven. And there it wraps itself around the tree of Krishna. And once a vine wraps itself around the tree, it can produce wonderful fruits. And those fruits fall into this world, even while you're still in this world, and you're in this world and that world. And you can taste them even while you're here, and those fruits are the fruits of love of God. And that's the goal of life. You win the lottery because you're on earth, and you're not a rock, or a plant, or an animal, or an impious human being. And you're spiritual but not religious. And you're a devotee, which means somebody gave you a seed. And then you water it, and the weeds like lust, anger, and greed start to grow up, and you learn how to pick those out because everybody's very expert at having a really nice garden, a really clean heart. They tell you all the things you got to avoid, all the things you got to do in order to keep your garden really nice. They work with you. They help you overcome your addictive behaviors, your chronic negativity, your lack of purpose in life, your inability to see the lessons which abound everywhere. And pretty soon you've got this amazing garden, your plants growing up, and you get entitled and start thinking you're all that, and then boom, you go to jail immediately. Don't pass go, don't collect $200, you're done. You're dead in the water. You're not even playing the game anymore. Your phone just got dropped in the toilet. You're done. It's over. Cut out the toilet and it broke. Like it cracked in half and it's in the toilet. Maybe if it's just dropped in the toilet, maybe somebody's 5 seconds will grabs it out, tries to dry it out. But if it breaks and it's there's nothing left to do. It's just that's awful. Actually, you still got to fish it out because otherwise it'll clog up your plumbing. So you get nothing, and it's a nightmare. That's the mad elephant. You play your cards right, you chant Hare Krishna, you weed your garden, and all of a sudden magic starts happening in your life. You start having ridiculous, impossible, otherworldly, super special spiritual experiences. And eventually that vine pierces through the covering of the universe and takes shelter of the tree of Krishna and produces beautiful fruits, fully connected, fully nourished, but existing in this world and that world. That's the beauty of the vine. It's got that invasive species thing. It can pierce through anything, and it lives in two places at once, connected here and connected there. And then the fruits fall down, and even while you're still in this world, you can taste them. You don't have to die to go to heaven. You can experience divinity even now. You can experience Krishna's love even now. And that's the fruits of love of God. The prem pal, the fruit of love of God. Prem phal. There's no fa in Sanskrit. If you say phal, it means you've been hanging out with the Muslims too long. Pal is Sanskrit. You know how they write? You know how they write? With that dot? For fa, with that dot? That doesn't exist in Sanskrit. It's a new letter. They just invented it 30, 40 years ago. Anyway, it's a side point. You know what I'm talking about? It's a new letter. You won't find any ancient Sanskrit text with that letter. It's a brand new letter that got invented because you're so close to Pakistan and Afghanistan, and you're so close that the Urdu language has actually changed. Hindi is 70% Urdu. But yeah, prem phal, the fruit of love of God. And then you can taste that, and that's the goal of life. You're good. You're good. I'm cool. Don't worry about it. You're working. That's all I need. That baby character and you doing that, and your kid can make as much noise as they want. You drove a long distance to be here. Only thing I don't like is when people don't turn their phones off, or when they just let their kids run around and they go like this, like, what can I do? I know what you can do. I've raised 6 children. You stand there and you do this. And you get good at it. That's what you do. So anyway, that's an elaborate metaphor / analogy that's meant by our tradition to help you wrap your head around this otherworldly notion of what a relationship between the soul and God looks like, and what the potentials are, and how wonderful and how magical it can be. It's just a skeleton you get to fill in. It's like one of those, like a coloring book. You get to fill it in and make it your own. But it gives you at least a skeleton, so you can start to color it in and really make a beautiful piece of art from the very beginning. And so, yeah, there you go. All right, thank you, IGTV. Adios. Any feedback? Oh, you're super kind. Thank you. Thank you for sitting and listening.